Welcome everybody to the 11th Annual Ag Literacy Week. Really excited that you're all here. I'm Missy Axelrod. I work for NOFA Vermont as an ag enhancement educator, basically connecting folks to farms in many different ways. And this year definitely looks very different for ag literacy. When we first started planning for this year's event, we were not in COVID, and we had all these grand ideas of intergenerational cooking and libraries and gathering people together. And once COVID hit and we knew that we weren't going to be in person, we had to take a quick turn. And, you know, I have to admit that I was pretty skeptical about the idea of having it virtually. And I think it's turned out really beautifully. We're able to have so many different people come from all over, not just Vermont. We've had people from other states as well. So we're really excited that you're here. I'm going to start the evening off with just a little bit about NOFA, who we are, what we do. And then I have a short video that I'm going to share with you. And then we will introduce our panelists for the evening. So tonight's event is building soil health resilience. And I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion with our guests and really talking about the base of what makes our food what it is when it's really grown in a super healthy way. So we'll get into more of that in a little bit. So NOFA Vermont is the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont. We're a statewide organization based in Richmond, usually. Most everybody's working from home right now. We're a membership organization made up of about 1,100 farmers, gardeners, homesteaders, and food enthusiasts. Our mission is promotes organic practices to build an economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just Vermont agricultural system that benefits all living things. We have a bunch of different programs that we highlight. I'm just going to mention a few of them. Education and engagement program is where we really just help spread and build the organic food movement by hosting our annual winter conference, which you'll be hearing lots about in the next month and will be in February. We have a lot of on-farm workshops where community members can come and learn from our farmers. We have pizza socials with a mobile pizza oven, and we have a lot of farm to school programs as well that we work with. And of course, Ag Literacy Week. We are also involved in a lot of policy and advocacy. We make our voices heard at the State House, advocating for farmers and the environment. And another highlight program is community food access, believing that everyone should have access to Vermont grown and raised foods. We manage a cost share CSA model that Kate Spring might talk a little bit about, coupon matching programs, and discounts at farm stands for Vermonters using their EBT cards. So that's a little bit about us at NOFA. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just share a little video with you.
Hello, my name is Jason Broughton. I'm the Commissioner of Department of Libraries and your state librarian. I'd like to welcome you to Agricultural Literacy Week. In understanding Agricultural Literacy Week, it's important to understand why agricultural literacy is important to everyone, particularly from a library perspective. We're all about learning and literacy, and understanding how food is grown helps everyone understand the importance of where food comes from, how we consume it, how we dispose of it, and how it nourishes us. So it also helps farmers, those in agriculture, and all persons who want to make a life in growing food. In understanding that food helps communities in a variety of ways, one is resilience. To have a resilient community, one must have systems in place that can weather adversity. Food is one of those systems that we must understand. So I want to thank you for participating in this year's Agricultural Literacy Week, and I look forward to you joining our events. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Grace Odell, and I'm the Executive Director of NOFA Vermont. We're so glad that you're joining us for Agricultural Literacy Week. Ag literacy is critical to our work at NOFA in building a just, verdant, and ecologically thriving food system. Everyone needs to understand how food is grown, how it gets from the field onto your plate, all the people along the way who support that process. Understanding the how of how our food system works is so critical to transforming the food system we have to the food system we need. A community that's truly resilient is a community that's in right relationship with its place and its land, with the people who make up that community, and with its values. These offerings we're excited to share with you as part of this Agricultural Literacy Week are a small way of helping share some of our values with you and inviting you to join us. Thank you so much for joining. We hope you enjoy.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to be taking turns through our panelists this evening. So we'll have one introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the next. And then I will ask a question and we'll move through our panelists again. If you have questions that you want to ask as they're sharing with us, feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll either jump in and try to answer it right away, or we'll save it for the end of our panel and make sure that we leave time for questions and answers. So feel free to add anything into the chat box. We'll be monitoring that. Thanks for being muted, everybody. It looks like we're on there. Everybody's at home. It's dinner time. Feel free to keep your video on. If you need to turn it off, we totally understand. If anybody wants to pop in and wave, like any kids, so you might see some of our presenters' kids popping in and out. Just make yourselves comfortable. You know, the idea is to see the human in all of us, since we're not together in person. We're here as humans in our different way of being together as a community tonight. So we're going to start off with an introduction, a little bit about each farm, and then we will move on. So we're going to start with Nick Cook. And Nick, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce kind of a little bit of your background, where you farm, and what your farm model is.
So, yeah, my name is Nick. I'm the Director of Agriculture at Cedar Circle Farm and Education Center, and we're located in East Thetford, Vermont, right on the Connecticut River. And I've been farming here with Cedar Circle for about 15 years. They are a certified organic operation for 20 years. They do fruits, vegetables, and flowers. And we also have a lot of educational programs for children and adults. And we primarily sell a lot of our products through CSA program. We also have a farm stand, and we do farmers markets as well. And we also have a partnering farm program with another nonprofit organization, Willing Hands, to get some food to people in need. So that's kind of the gist of it. So.
Beautiful. Thanks. And Kate?
Mute. Okay, I'm unmuted. Hello, I'm Kate, and I run Good Heart Farmstead. We are in Worcester, Vermont, just north of Montpelier, and I run it with my husband, Edge, and we have a son named Waylon, and we started Good Heart in 2013. Our farm's mission is to help make local food more accessible to low-income Vermonters, and also to increase the connection that people have with their food and with the land. And so on the food accessibility side, we do a lot of work with the NOFA Farm Share program, and we accept EBT, SNAP, which are also known as food stamps. And then this year, we kind of took the typical CSA model of, excuse me, where typically we used to give 10% off a share to any members would sign up and they'd get 10% off of like the retail value of the share. And this year we started just putting 10% forward. And what that means is instead of for a summer share, for example, giving someone like $45 off, we would just charge them full price and then put $45 towards subsidized shares. So I just was looking at the numbers and saw that, and that came to just over $5,000 that we were able to put towards food access to low-income families and individuals this year, which is the first year we've done that. And it was really exciting to see how that could make a difference, especially in a pandemic year. We became certified organic a couple years into our operation, but we've always used organic practices. And we farm on a slope, about 12% slope, and have permanent raised beds. Because of our slope and our intensive growing style, we don't use a four-wheel tractor, though we do have a BCS with a couple different implements. And yeah, have really focused on helping build soil and creating a farm that is both ecologically and socially and financially sustainable. And at any given point in the season, we may be working on one of those three legs or all of them at the same time. But our goal for our farm has always been to have a very holistic, like get to a holistic place where we're able to support our community, support our family, and help support the environment too. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk with all of you.
Awesome. And Tyler, I can't skip that picture.
Hey everybody, I'm Tyler Webb. With my wife Melanie and our two kids Wyatt and Willow, we steward Stony Pond Farm in Fairfield, Vermont. We're primarily a grass-based certified organic dairy. We're first-generation farmers, and so we've been certified organic for 17 years. I think we've been in business now, enough years that I can't remember. And let's see. Yeah, so primarily we're organic dairies selling fluid milk to Organic Valley. And we have a value-added creamery component. We just built a creamery this past year, and we've been making some aged cheeses, and we distribute through a variety of channels. We've been longtime members of the Burlington Farmers Market with a value-added meat enterprise for that whole time, and we have a farmstay agritourism component. And between all of those things, we stay really, really busy. It's been a long time since I've engaged in revisiting our sort of holistic goal, holistic planning, but I tried to kind of boil it down into one sentence. And essentially, you know, our goal is to be happy, fulfilled, prosperous farmers, sharing a life of meaningful work with contented cows, stewarding a functioning landscape, and passing on the fruits of that food to consumers that's just unmatched in quality. And now with regeneration sort of being a buzzword, you know, I'd like to think like we took a farm that was far from that, and it's been a lot of time investing, and it's been exciting to see the return. I came to farming from a master's degree in agronomy and soil science, and then a few years working in conservation for with NRCS, part of the USDA. And coming out of college, I wanted to save the world, and quickly realized that working with NRCS wasn't the way that I was going to accomplish that task. And in fact, saving the world is a pretty tall order. So we've kind of committed ourselves to at least saving 300 acres of it, and trying to inspire people through taste, through quality food, and people who are able to come and visit, and people are able to get a little bit of experience of the farm, to either support that through purchasing decisions, to support that through conservation initiatives, to potentially We have an incubation program where we've created several young farms. And so, the ideal goal being like maybe inspire people to have the courage to quit their jobs too and go on to be farmers.
So I'm Missy Axelrod. Our farm is Drift Farmstead. We're in Roxbury, which is in between Randolph and Montpelier, just on the other side from the Mad River Valley. And we are a diversified farm. We grow organic vegetables for a winter farm share. We raise pigs for meat, goats for meat and dairy on a very small scale, and sheep and chickens and beef cows. And our goal is to have a small farm share and to share with a small amount of families what it's like to eat like a farmer year round. And so we really incorporate what we do, how we do it, why we do it with the families that are a part of our farm, and really just trying to help them be a part of our web here. One of our big focuses is education. We do a lot of on-farm education programs. We work with over a dozen public schools that we go into the schools and do farm and food and nutrition education. And they come here for extended farm visits. And we run a farm school here and summer camps and other educational programming. And so our main goal is to try to do what we do on the farm in a really healthy way and to share that with others so that they can be inspired to either purchase food that's similar in other parts of the world or to then go off and grow their own food, whether it's just homesteading or farming. So what inspired the discussion with all the farmers tonight was the film, The Biggest Littlest Farm. I'm curious if any of you watched that before this evening. If you did, you can just do a little yes in the chat box. Feel free to even put in a short comment of what you thought about the film. The reason we chose it is because it was filmed beautifully. The cinematographer was a National Geographic filmer turned farmer. And just the visions of what a kind of drab piece of land can turn into when you put your heart and soul and a lot of time into it, I think is really eye-opening for folks that may have never even stepped foot on a diversified soil healthy farm. And so just the visuals, I think, can really be eye-opening for folks. And so what we wanted to talk about tonight is what does soil health mean to us as farmers, and what do we incorporate into our farming practices? So the first question that I have for all of you is, how do you see your farm as an interconnection to the ecosystem and the human world around you? So Nick, I'll let you answer that question first.
So, I mean, the farm, I'll start with the interconnected to the, I mean, we're growing food for people. So, that's a pretty big deal. And, being connected to the community through that and helping to educate people about, how important your food choices really are and the greater scheme of things is really important to us here. And it's kind of interesting because I didn't come from an agricultural background at all before I started farming. So I had no idea how important that was until after I started farming. So I can sort of remember what it was like to not have any idea how food was produced. So that's, and then as far as being part of the rest of the ecosystem, every agriculture by nature changes the landscape no matter what. I mean, this farm, a lot of the land in the Connecticut River Valley has been in agricultural production for a real long time. But, at one point it wasn't. So you're constantly changing it to sort of meet your needs. And so that means that everything has changed around it for many generations and decades. And so this new sort of approach for us, it's always been to sort of minimize that through organic practices. The farm at Cedar Circle wasn't always organic. It was conventional. In fact, it was a conventional dairy, I think, a long time ago. So it's gone through a lot of different changes, and a lot of the diversity and all of that has changed over the decades as well. We're actually still kind of nestled within some dairy production anyway, so we still have some presence of that production systems around us, but at least on our the acreage that we farm, we've changed it quite a bit. So we're constantly monitoring that and evaluating that, and now to take it even another step further, working towards regenerating it or improving it even further for us has been really important too, and just learning so much about how to do all of that has been pretty interesting and hopeful. I mean, climate change is, for many years was doom and gloom for sure. And, you had to turn off that fossil fuel spigot or you were it's the end of the world. But, more recently, a lot of the conversations have been a little bit more hopeful, at least around agriculture and the possibilities of being able to potentially change some of those outlooks have been, at least for me, and starting a new family. I have a 3-year-old son. At least that gives me hope. So yeah.
Awesome.
Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
Yeah. So we came to the land that we're farming on now. We bought it in 2012, and it had previously been part of a larger farm that over 100 years was slowly subdivided and turned back to forest and houses and not really any farms at all. So when we came to Worcester, the land we have is about 14.5 acres up on a hillside. And I remember looking for land and feeling like, deeds and random rectangles drawn on tax maps just don't make sense ecologically. And so, and then over the last 8 years of being here, also starting to become aware of and learn more about like the longer history before, the 150 years that I was taught that I learned about when we first came here, of like, this used to be the Ladd farm, and it used to be a sheep farm and then a dairy farm. And now we're kind of reclaiming this old high pasture as vegetables. And we have about 1.5 acres of vegetables, but also a lot of forest around us. And so thinking about like, how do we manage a small amount of land within the larger ecosystem, and also starting to acknowledge and learn about like the longer history of the Abenaki people in Vermont. And NOFA had Melody Walker Brook speak at one of the conferences, I think 2 years ago. And that was around the time that someone had given me a book on seeds by Frederick Wiseman, who's an Abenaki man and teacher and gardener. And so as we look at like, where do we fit within the ecosystem, more and more we're trying to see what that means, both like within the context of history, within the context of where we are climate wise and food access wise, and how and where we want to go. And so personally, I've always, like, my personal approach and Edge's approach is like, humans are not separate from the ecosystem. So how do we become a more aware and active, like consciously active part of the ecosystem that we're part of? And so for our farm, as I said, we have like 14.5 acres. 5.5 of that is in woodlands that's connected to hundreds of acres of forest. And then we've got about 7 acres in pasture and 1.5 acres in crops, or an acre that we're cultivating, and then like 1/2 acre that this year we just had cover crops and chickens grazing. But then we also have been building in perennials, so things like elderberries and raspberries, and we have a small orchard that's more of like a home-sized orchard that's not yet fruiting. I remember watching the Biggest Little Farm and thinking, wait, do they really fruit that fast? Because the time lapse really makes it seem like they pick up pretty quickly. But yeah, so in terms of like how we see our farm in connection with the ecosystem and the human world, it's how, like, what's next to us, like where, not like what do we need to do to mold the land into how we want it to be, but like where is the water table naturally high, where are our soils sandier or heavier, and taking cues from the land in terms of where we placed the main cropland, taking cues from the land of like, where does it make sense to put elderberries because of what the needs are of those specific plants. And also looking at like, how can we, how can we basically like take some workload off of our shoulders and let, beneficial insects come in and get rid of the aphids instead of having to be like, wait, what do we spray? So we are certified organic, but we also don't use any sprays that are allowable in certified organic production. We are such a small farm that we really tend towards figuring out how to create the environment that just supports healthy plants and supports a healthy balance of insects and biodiversity. So that's the approach that we've taken, and that can, originally we also had sheep that we grazed and poultry and pigs. That was a little too much for 2.5 people. We've never had like a full-time year-round staff, so it was just a little too much for our human capabilities. But so now we focus mainly on vegetables. But like this year, we, instead of trucking in a lot more compost, we decided to bring some broilers back and just have the chickens graze on one plot of land that we really wanted to give a boost to the soil. And now we have like, after them, we have clover and oats and some really beautiful regrowth that came up on that land. So that's just like one example of like looking at like, where can we work with other natural forces rather than trying to do it all ourselves within just like our own capabilities, which are never going to be as powerful as working with the land. So yeah, that's a little overview, and I'll leave it there, and then I know we'll come back to more questions later.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kate. And Tyler.
Okay, so I guess when it comes to our farm, one of our first considerations is that we view ourselves as stewards. And I really like to use this quote by this guy, Doug Duran, that it's not ours, it's just our turn. And our thought was to come to this place and we're extremely grateful that our lives and our job is to essentially wake up in this beautiful place and kind of wander around trying to make it better and make the lives of our animals better and the lives of the people around us who consume our products better. And that's our life. And when we're done, hopefully we leave it in a better place, but we know that our presence in the grand scheme of things is relatively short. That said, I came to farming from an academic background and as a hunter conservationist. I didn't grow up hunting. I grew up in total suburbia and was an adult onset hunter right about the same time that I was finishing up a dual degree in anthropology and plant and soil science. And what brought me to soil science was really from this anthropological perspective that the rise and subsequent fall of just about every organized civilization in the history of humanity as a result of soil erosion and oftentimes overgrazing in the uplands around areas where annual crops were planted. And so I really focused on grazing management and kind of went down this road of conservation supposedly, but working through this very regimented, NRCS kind of reductionist programs. At the same time, I discovered upland bird hunting and deer hunting, and I very quickly realized that humans on the landscape are kind of the apex predator, as well as the apex resource consumer, as well as the apex habitat fragmenter. And I became really impassioned and interested in that from a conservation standpoint, and became enamored with the idea of someday stewarding a small piece of land with the goal of trying to reconnect some of these corridors, some of these dots, some of this, through forestry and wetlands and corridors and plants and all sorts of things, like try to like allow wildlife to have a place to share a place on the landscape, at least whatever part I was lucky enough to steward. And so I was lucky to find a little chunk of land while I was working, and eventually I was even luckier to have the courage to quit my job and try to move that chunk of land into a farm. And it was leaving the government, where I realized that there was essentially my job as a soil conservationist. There was a massive disconnect between what I would say was, to be blunt, I would say that primarily my goal or what was forced upon me, my job was to railroad farmers into adopting engineering practices despite agronomic consequences. And a lot of these agronomic consequences I thought were severe and were having severe negative impacts on water quality, which was a hot topic and still is issue within the state. And it was a very reductionist approach, and I had a different idea as to how that could be addressed, and it was kind of the birth of my interest in what now is sort of a buzzword, is becoming this idea of ecosystem services, and that a farm is really ideally a farm is a functioning landscape in which food or fiber is just one of the ecosystem services that are coming off of that, and wildlife habitat being another one of interest. And then as a soil scientist and a water quality sort of specialist, like, now carbon sequestration and infiltration, water holding capacity, nutrient retention, all of these things are different services that a land steward who's managing a piece of land can provide humanity. Our farms, although stewarded by us in our present realm of ownership, are owned by us or something. They're they really should be viewed as the public good, and I think there's a way for us stewards to produce food and an array of other ecosystem services that benefits the public good. And so that's kind of what we've dedicated our farm to doing. It's a very, all of our soils are, just about all of them are Cabot extremely stony silt loams or Woodstock rock outcrop. So it's an extraordinary place to grow grass. And that's what we're doing. And then we have a lot of sort of dovetailing enterprises. And I'll go more into grass and stuff on the next question, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. Oh, it's so fun hearing from everybody. So just a little bit from me. My background is I worked on a diversity of small, mostly vegetable farms here and there while going to school for sustainable ag and food systems with a focus on social systems. And there was no program out there anywhere at all to do sustainable ag at that time. So I kind of did my own designed major and pieced everything together. But what I really came to realize is that I really wanted to bring people to the farm, to the land, and the farm to the land, and to really kind of web it together so that people can understand how important the land is and how to treat it, how to steward it, to understand how important food is, and that it's not just something we have to eat, but that we want to eat to nourish our bodies, and that really to bring people to the land, that they really had to become involved in it. So when we purchased our farm 12 years ago, before we purchased it, we walked the land, and I looked at it and I said, my husband really wanted to buy it. And I was like, no, this cannot be a farm. There's some small signs that it had been farmed or homesteaded a long time ago, but the woodlot was trash. It had been the timber had been over harvested probably 50 years ago. It was a mess. The grass was growing like little shrubs little blueberries, looking at it. I said, this is so acidic. I don't want this. I want something that's lush and ready to go. And a year later, we came back to the same place again. And we said, all right, you know what? We're going to make a go of this. We're going to build the soil. We're going to build it into what our vision is. And it took a lot of time to really, what it was focusing on the soil and giving it time, bringing animals onto the farm, grazing intensively so that we could really concentrate their manure into certain areas, lots and lots of cover cropping, lots of time kind of just letting soil rest. And I don't think our farm is as glamorous and quick as the film showed of the blossoming of change, but if I step back and look at that day when we first stepped on the farm, I can really see a difference 12 years later. And I really just enjoy bringing people of all ages onto the farm to use it as a teaching tool to bring people to the land as a community and to understand how important and connected people need to be to the land in a healthy way. And so that's really how we see our farm at this time, is really trying to model healthy practices through growing soil. So the next question I have for everybody is, how is soil health focus on your farm? What do you do to improve your soil? What are some of your methods or practices? And how have you seen that change your harvest, your quality, your quantity, maybe nutritional value? Have you calculated that in different ways? And what does that look like? So we'll start with Nick.
So soil health is, pretty important to us here at the farm. I guess one of the, we certainly, it's changed a lot since I started, but not a whole heck of a lot. We always incorporated a lot of cover crops into our rotation. We are still a pretty diverse vegetable farm, so we have a lot of mixture of different vegetables, and we also have strawberries as well, so that adds into our rotation. We've done a lot of composting. There was a few years where we incorporated a lot of animal manure, and then a short stint where we didn't do much of that, and we just tried to really use cover crops. Now we're kind of back to a little bit more of a balance. And probably in the past about 5 years, one of the biggest steps that we started taking is reducing tillage as much as possible. And in the last year or so, we've felt confident enough that we could start trying to move large sections of our fields into a no-till system. We haven't figured that out yet. That still there's still some challenges there on exactly how to manage the nutrients. But right away, one of the biggest benefits that I think we've seen that's from adopting that sort of no-till system is the being able to weather the drought monsoon cycles that have kind of been a little bit more often these past few years. So during dry parts, we don't have to irrigate as much. And certainly we don't see any erosion when we get, some downpours. But yeah, we're still evaluating that. I do have to say that our production levels as far as yields has been a challenge in that new system, but for the benefits that we have been seeing, we feel like it's a reasonable trade-off. I mean, it's part of a larger transition, so it's not like we're trying to move the whole farm at our scale to that system right away. We're still experimenting a lot with what's going to be the most effective way to do that. So
how many acres did you transition into no-till or minimal till?
So right now we have for specifically no-till, we of our 25 acres that we till, we have like 5 acres that we've committed completely to a no-till system that were at our varying different stages of we call it a transition. So whether that's cash cropping or just cover cropping or just initially establishing sort of just committing to the transition. And then we have some other acreage that we're doing minimal tillage and strip tillage on as well. So I by far, I think the most challenging part of the no-till system for us has been nutrient cycling, coming from one of the areas that I became interested in through agriculture pretty quick was the management of nutrients and doing the nutrient management plan and sort of balancing all that has definitely added some challenges for us to. I mean, we're sort of hopeful that it's the long-term benefits are going to begin to pay off, but we don't really know what those are, how long that's going to be yet. So, but so far it looks good. So
awesome, thanks. And Kate?
Yeah, so we're at a way smaller scale than Nick is managing. So we're growing in 1.5 acres at the most, and sometimes depending on what's in a cover crop, what we're actually harvesting from can be, just about 1 acre. So in that sense, it's a lot easier. Like, we have built the farm to run on human scale tools and BCS. We do practice no-till. We have, so we focus on using broad forks, and we do things to keep the soil covered, like between cover crops and silage tarps and straw. But for us, when we came to this land, it had previously, a long time ago, been a sheep farm and then a dairy farm and hayed. And then for probably 10 or 15 years before we bought it, it was just brush hogged. And the soil was pretty low and across the board in every nutrient, and was at 5.5 pH. And we just knew that we were going to have a lot of work to do to bring the soil up to where we would need it for crop production. And so for our first handful of years, we did that mainly by bringing in a lot of compost, 20 to 60 yards of compost a year, depending on the year, which is for our size farm, like a lot of compost. We happen to also just be, 15 minutes away from Vermont compost. So thinking again of like the ecosystem that we're in, I also like to think of like, what are the farming systems ecosystem? And, part of our vision is like, we want to help create and support an economy that also supports other agricultural endeavors that, it's all just like a circle that we're connected in. So that's a little bit of a side shoot, but we really have built the soil up through both initially through adding a lot of compost and different nutrients. And then now we're at the point where this year we didn't buy any compost, but did switch to using worm castings from Black Dirt Farm, which has been really nice because it's like this really concentrated boost of nutrients that does similar work to the compost you're getting from Vermont compost, but we don't need to put nearly as much on. So physically, it's a lot easier to apply. But then we also use cover crops, and that's something that we're trying to increase because it's, one, it is much cheaper than buying compost or worm castings. And we've seen that it's really beneficial to be able to rest the soil. So one of the tricky parts of having such a small area that we're growing in is that it can be hard to give up certain plots to cover crop when it's like, oh, but we could get another round of mesclun or something. So what we're looking ahead towards is actually opening up more space so that we can have a better cover crop rotation and give the soil that rest, and also just have it be more financially just a little easier on the bank account without having to buy in all the nutrients that we were adding. But over the last 8 years, we have really seen a difference in how much we have had to add to our beds. And like Nick mentioned, because we're on a slope, we're also very conscious of erosion. So like what we've also seen, like the ability for the beds to withstand heavy rains and also hold on to moisture during really dry seasons. Like this past summer was so dry. So we really focus on keeping the soil covered as much as possible. And we're doing anything we can to build that soil organic matter. I think that is, I think that answers most of the question.
Great. How often, and this will be a question for all of you as well, somebody asked, how often do you take soil samples?
We've taken them just once a year, typically.
In the fall or the spring?
Well, there's been years where we haven't gotten to it in the fall, so we take it in the spring. So, but yeah, ideally it's in the fall.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. And Tyler.
Okay, so our approach towards soil health, again, kind of starts with our viewpoint as to what it is that we're doing and what we're actually farming. And so essentially we take a step back and we realize that ultimately what we're doing is harvesting solar energy with a really, really dense, abundant, biodiverse array of plants. And creating an environment in which those plants convert that energy into sugar, some of which they trade to microorganisms in exchange for nutrients that the plants can't access with roots themselves. The rest they use to grow more plants that is converted into protein and fat from the miraculous microorganisms within the rumens of our cows. So we thought we were farming cows, but we're really farming microorganisms, and lots of them, either in the rumen or in the soil. And so to try to, and which one's more important? I don't know. I lean a little bit more towards the soil. If we take care of the microorganisms in the soil, they're going to take care of the plants that are going to take care of the ones inside the cow, and then the cow's going to do her magic, and we'll benefit. So, the soil scientist in me is, initially very focused on, the basics. It's like, great, we're gonna address biology, we're gonna address chemistry and physics. But I've come to really simplify that over the years and think that the answer is carbon in food. And the more microbial food we can provide, the better the whole system is. And so we're farming at a pretty large scale. We're grazing, large in my mind. I think farmers are kind of like, at least dairy farmers anyway, are kind of like goldfish. If you just give us like more land, we just kind of like grow into that and get accustomed to it. We started with 30 acres of what was 30 acres of abandoned land. And then we've been able to just kind of acquire neighboring pieces over time. And so now we're at about 300 acres, the other 270 of which was fairly abused land. I would say, like, kind of going back to this idea of like ecosystem services, like a land base has a functioning landscape, that there's equity in that biological capital. And for a long time, humans have been drawing off of that. And the previous stewards of the lands that we're farming were definitely taking and not giving much back. And so we inherited soils, although most of them were still in a perennial crop. Organic matter is really low, like 3 and 4%, and deep plow pans, whether those be like dense glacial pans or just heavy equipment. A lot of disinterest in the microbial processes. So like liquid manure was used on a majority of that land, and I could talk for like an hour about facultative organisms and the impact of liquid manure on forage quality. And again, like when the microorganisms are thrown off, like the chemistry and more so the physics, the physical structure of the soil gets thrown off. So we inherited this kind of like taken from land and this abandoned land, and we've had to work towards healing both of those things. And the answer really had been carbon. So fortunately, cows poop a lot, and they're constantly just kind of upcycling grass into fat and protein, and it just passes through their system. It's amazing. They just keep eating, and it just comes out and out. So we early on completely abandoned any sort of ideas of managing a liquid system, and have been building compost bedded pack barns and bringing in 2, 3, sometimes 4,000 yards of kiln-dried sawdust out of Quebec, big tractor trailer loads, usually 1 to 2 a month. During the winter periods, during the grazing season, we're not as reliant, but and I aerate those with a little kind of homemade spring tooth harrow thing twice a day. And so our cows are just, we add fresh sawdust like once a week, and we aerate twice a day. And so we're managing this big, deep bedding pack at about 140 degrees of weed seed free compost by May. It's amazing. The cows essentially are sleeping on this like 140 degree like Tempur-Pedic bed all winter long. And then we're given this, like, I mean, I don't know, I have a 60 by 100 concrete sort of bunker for compost, and it's centrally located in the farm. And in the spring, we clean out those barns and we move everything down there and let it cook a little bit longer. But like sky's the limit, but it's really how high the excavator could reach. Like I pilot with my tractor, and then we bring the excavator down there, and and so that we might have this 60 by 90 space that's like 40 feet tall, full of compost, and I'll cover 70 to 80 acres with that over the course of the summer. A little bit after our first and second, maybe third cut of hay if I haven't got it done by then. I've relied a little bit on composted poultry manure, although I don't really love supporting. It doesn't seem to be a very like sustainable industry. These giant sort of chicken houses, and so I don't love like supporting that business. Although I can't deny that the microbes really love that as a food source. But again, that's primarily sawdust with a bunch of extra nitrogen in there. We're using a little bit of wood ash from the McNeil steam generation plant in Burlington, and we use a little bit of limestone. So the poultry manure too, they feed a lot of calcium to the chickens to have the eggshells stay hard or something like that. I don't know. But it has almost the same neutralizing effect as lime. So our main goal through all of this is just to import lots of carbon, raise the pH to be like sort of a good place for most of these microbes, and invest there. We've seen our soil organic matter levels rise from that 3 to 4% up into the like 9 to 11% just in 10 years of doing this. And anecdotally, we're still pretty like small scale for in terms of like the dairy world, but we're still, we're driving on fields with heavy equipment, tractors and manure spreaders and things, weigh several thousand pounds. And I used to, in the spring, first cut sometimes to get it off timely, we would end up, rutting wetter sections of fields. And now that no longer happens barely ever. It's been amazing to see that sponge affect the resilience of the soil as a whole, just by increasing that organic matter. You've probably heard for every 1%, it's like 20 to 25,000 gallons of water holding capacity. So as you increase your soil organic matter, 1% organic matter, you increase that soil's capacity to hold on to water by 20 to 25,000 gallons per acre, which it's amazing, and we see it. For sure, and so that's really rewarding when we're thinking about our sort of water quality goals and what our landscape is doing to how benefiting our watershed. And so when we're looking at soil health, we're looking at it as this how do we treat the microbes that grow the plants that benefit our cows, but then also how do we manage our soil so that it's benefiting all of the people around us. And it's what is a win-win for the cow is a win-win for all the people, whether they're eating or consuming something from the cow or just living downstream from them, at least when they're managed in the way that we are doing it. And then another aspect of our soil building and soil health is just simply the plant grazing. So our cows are grazing very intense rotation, usually 2 to 3 moves during the course of a day, once at night. With minimum rest periods of 35 to 50 days, and they don't come back to graze a particular area for that 35 to 50 days. So imagine, whatever, didn't mow your lawn or something like that for that period of time. There's this kind of lush array of plants. And yeah, for quality, we've definitely seen our forage quality increase. Yield-wise, we're about the same. We're kind of average about 4.5 tons to the acre, which would be sort of our county and sort of our soil average. We've seen our milk production go up. And for me, I remember to this day, I got interested in dairy farming, maybe from some in-person meetings and groups like this, but, there was this immense camaraderie amongst dairy farmers that I was really attracted to as a younger guy, and I wanted to know a little bit about that. And at that point, I had started engaged in land stewardship with beef cows, but the feedback loop is really slow. You might see something happen on the land in a season, But on the cow side of things, you know, you would wait 27 months to see if your ribeyes were better or marbled or something like that, you know, based on certain decisions. Do I move the cows twice a day or 10 times a day or play them this type of music or whatever, you know. Where with dairy cows, that feedback loop is really fast. Like you'll see it in the milk tank and you'll taste it in the quality of the milk. And now with the cheese, we'll see it in cheese yields. And so I don't know, so that's pretty cool. But and so we've seen it with our milk quality is better, our forage quality is better, and a lot of folks there like we're getting really rave reviews on our Tome cheese, and that it's really unique, and it's we're not actually sure why, other than the milk goes straight from the parlor right to the cheese vat and is turned into cheese within an hour. And I think it's just really fresh and really high quality milk, and that makes good cheese. So it's rewarding there too, and it all goes back to the soil.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. I love that we have a dairy farmer on this panel, because I think so many people think about soil, they only think about vegetables. And bringing, you know, a dairy farmer to this discussion to talk about how important high quality grass is for quality milk is, I think it's eye-opening for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. So at our farm in Roxbury, we've tried many different techniques, not many, but a few ones for longer periods of time. We used to heavily till with we're small. We're about an acre as well of vegetables and a couple high tunnels. And we would go into the high tunnels and each plot with the heavy tractor and rototiller and till it spring and fall and throw in cover crops. And, you know, I was starting to notice compaction, and I was noticing that I'd have to wait until the moisture in the soil was proper before we went in with the tractor. And so I was just sitting like a duck waiting for, you know, an empty bed to be able to plant it. And finally, when I started having a little bit more time to really focus on our techniques, we stopped using the tractor and stopped using a walk behind tiller, and went mostly to no-till, one bed at a time. And we're now year 2 and having all of our vegetable plots be no-till. And so we do a little bit of broad forking, but we have mostly done away with that and just letting the plants do their job with side dressing, really paying attention to soil tests that we do once a year in the fall, and looking at the nutrients for each crop instead of just throwing everything into each bed and saying, okay, cool, I spread all of my manure this year and I'm done. And really just paying attention bed to bed. And what I really noticed the difference after a couple of years in some of the gardens is just how the hard pan went away and how deep the roots started growing, and noticing a difference in the amount we were able to harvest and the like lower percentages of crop failure. And being such a small farm that we really need to get 100% or at least close to 100% of high value harvest, and not having crop failures because of disease or insect problems or really nutrient problems is what it came down to. So we've seen a big increase in production by mostly going to no-till or minimal till with the broad fork. So I've been really excited to see that. So yeah, that's just a little bit from me. But what I want to do now is open it up to questions. And I'm just going to let the three of you jump in to answer any of them when you're ready. Nick, if you want to start with maybe just answering the soil testing question. How often do you soil test? What are you noticing from your soil test, and how do you act on that? If you want to answer that, and then I'll jump to the next question.
So we soil test every year here at the farm. And yeah, that's the main driver. You know, we send all our soil samples to UVM, and they give us their, you know, we send in a list of recommendations that we'd like, and they spit out the pretty generic NPK, you know, recommendations. And that's pretty much from our commercial veggie perspective what you typically do. Now, through a lot of work that we have done with UVM extension, we've gotten much better at being able to dial in green manure credits, get our nitrogen primarily from a lot of cover cropping practices, and you know, whatever we amend with for compost. And so yeah, that's I mean that really is kind of the driver is soil testing. And now when we started moving to the no-till stuff, we also started to look at a lot of different things. You know, Tyler talks a lot about the biology, and for years we didn't really pay attention to that from an annual vegetable production perspective either. And so we've started to really trying to look at that a lot closer. So we test some of our fields, not all of them. That type of testing is, at least for us right now, is pretty expensive. But we've started to try and look at what's going on down there biologically from and how to what are and can we do to help benefit vegetable production from a biological perspective. And a lot of that comes from cover cropping, and the diversity of cover crops is what we've seen have the most dramatic effect, at least so far, on biological diversity in our soil specifically. So the more diverse your cover crop mix, the more diverse the biology is going to be. And we're certainly thinking that we're going to be relying a lot more on that, on those indicators to help us figure out how to grow a lot of different vegetables in a no-till system, in a rotational way. You know, so it's been kind of neat and interesting to learn about that stuff, but still a long ways to go for us to figure out how we're gonna use all of that effectively. But yeah, soil testing is very important.
Awesome. Here's a question for any of you from Alan LePage. Has anyone used windbreaks either already naturally existing in the landscape or at some built level to better control or to better lessen evaporation to maintain soil moisture in the summer? And also maybe to prevent heat loss early in the season for more optimal earlier seed germination?
So we are on a really windy slope, and we have not yet put in windbreaks, but it's something we have been talking about and thinking about, like how would we want to put those windbreaks in, and what would they be? So I guess I don't really have an answer of like what we've done yet, but that it's something that we know that we've like looked at and been like, okay, it could be really helpful to exactly as you said, like help decrease the amount of water that we're putting on, that we're having to irrigate with, because it can help decrease the soil like drying out, especially for those seed beds, even though typically when we're seeding, we're then covering it with remay and watering into the remay too. But Kimberly Hagen, who works for UVM Extension, she lives right down the road from us, and I know she's been doing some experiments with silviculture, and so we're just like at the beginning stage of thinking like what trees or what types of bushes might we put in strategic places to create those windbreaks, because I think it could be really, really helpful. Yeah, so that's all I've got on that one. This is something that I saw a few people talk or mention early on in the comments. It's slightly different angle, which is the financial aspect of the Biggest Little Farm and like what it takes to create these regenerative systems. And also something I've been thinking about as like basically this micro farm within a larger ecosystem. And what I've been reading from Indigenous farmers and farmers in the BIPOC community, where like, challenging us to think more of on an ecosystem scale. And one of the things when I first saw the Biggest Little Farm was like, I heard that criticism of like, well, it just costs so much money. But I think we also need to step back and look at how much money our government puts into conventional farming that we don't think about because we don't actually see it, and how much money, like all of the indirect costs that come from a conventional farming system that depletes soil and pollutes water and doesn't really effectively create systems to feed people in this country. So I don't have an answer to this, but I just feel like it's important to bring up and start thinking like, how can we start thinking about investing in regenerative practices on a system-wide approach. So, you know, rather than like subsidizing, rather than having the subsidies we currently have that don't typically go to any small organic farmers that I know, like how can we reimagine a system that like actually, instead of having to crowdfund for or get investors for these regenerative systems, how can we create like the subsidies or systems or supports that actually feed into more people adopting regenerative methods? So that's just like a huge question that I have that I think is important to bring up as we talk about the Biggest Little Farm, or as we talk about all of our individual farms and what we're doing and how we are thinking about agriculture in the larger ecosystem. So
thank you for bringing it to the table.
Yeah.
Very, very important thing to think about. Absolutely. Another question from Al, versus buying compost, has anyone simply collected biomass from their own land or from nearby landowners who want, for example, fall leaves removed to simply make their own compost? The idea here is not to spend money, but essentially time to use existing nutrients in your own land's biomass or biomass from outside, therefore decreasing your out-of-pocket costs, but also enhancing sustainability. Does anybody have an example of something like that?
I guess I could. I mean, so on the farm here, we do utilize a lot of that. Exactly what he's suggesting. You know, we keep track of all our own leaves because we also obviously, just by nature of the vegetable production, we do generate, and we sometimes have stuff that has gone by or passed. So we try and compost all of our own, you know, green waste that we create, and we certainly need plenty of carbon to mix that in. We'll use leaves and whatever else we can scrounge up around the farm to try and compost and create as much compost as we can on the farm. Absolutely.
And Nick, a question for you. How do you test the biology in your soils, and have you found a way to examine it yourself?
So right now we send some samples out to a lab in Oregon, Earth Fort Labs. They'll test and they'll give you a pretty comprehensive analysis of what's going on in there for diversity and fungal and bacterial balance and stuff like that. And you can ask for a recommendation as well. If you're trying to grow vegetables, you know, you want a little bit more of a bacterial dominant soil versus, you know, strawberries, for example, will kind of want it a little bit more balanced, if not fungal. So, yeah, it's been, we're just beginning to learn to maybe start putting some of that stuff under a microscope. And, you know, Elaine Ingram's got courses on all that stuff. And we definitely know a lot of people that could probably help us out with that. And we're definitely looking into that to start becoming more knowledgeable about the critters that are in the soil, for sure.
Did you say Earth Fort Labs? Somebody just wanted to clarify.
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. Are any of you using biochar? And if you are, do you want to talk about that at all? Or if you're not, maybe why you're not? Either Kate or Nick.
we are not using it, but it's something that I've seen at like different conferences. So I think for us, it's just a matter of learning more about it and to see if, like, how it might fit into our systems right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, we have tried some biochar in the past. We at the time we didn't really fully understand. It was right when biochar kind of first started coming out, and we weren't really sure what exactly we were going to be looking for. So we did do some tested plots on sort of different amounts and stuff, and we didn't really see anything immediately that impressed us from a production standpoint. So we haven't revisited it in a while, but we've certainly been following the conversations and the research that's continuing to be done behind it and the benefits that it does have. And just like, you know, similar to Kate, we're still, especially with now with our, you know, transition to using more no-till systems, we're going to determine if at all where it will best fit in our rotations.
Okay, a very important question. How can consumers support farm and food businesses that support soil health? Buy from these farmers.
So I'm going to do like well, there's like the obvious of like, yeah, like what you said, buy directly from farmers. Or if you're not buying directly from farmers, you know, buy from stores that are buying wholesale from farmers, because that's a really important part of it. But I also think that it's really important to support policy that supports farmers. So there are a lot of, you know, different ways that you can do that. One could be like signing up for the NOFA newsletter, because there's always different actions that NOFA is involved in. That's like, you know, just like helping you reach out to your representatives. There's, I think that what I see, even though we try to do a lot of education with our customers, I will still talk to our customers who have been CSA members for years, and they're like, I had no idea that they're like about this aspect of organic. And so like a big one right now is that the FSA just decided not to reimburse organic farmers at the full rate, that 75%, which is what the Farm Bill said to do. So what that means for farmers is that organic farmers pay money out of pocket to get this certification. And but typically we get 75% of that cost back. It's called the cost share program. So it's just sort of like all of a sudden 25% of that is not coming back to farmers. And that cost share is important because it helps even the playing field between, like, you know, or it helps somehow like acknowledge that organic farmers are doing a really good job and they're paying more to have this certification, whereas, you know, conventional farmers are not taking these same practices that are benefiting the soil per se. You know, anyway, I'm not, I could go down a wormhole there, but like, so yeah, one thing, just getting involved in policy or just starting to, you know, get to know who your representatives are. And yeah, so an easy way is like signing up for NOFA newsletters or getting involved in the organization Rural Vermont that does a lot of great work for like grass-based livestock farms and policy work for farmers, because I think it is really important to buy from farmers, but just like I had mentioned systems, like it's the systems that need to transform just as much as like individual actions. So it's like when you can pair those things together, then it can become really a lot more powerful.
Can I chime in for a second here?
Absolutely.
I think I was fortunate enough to be a farmer representative and sit on the state of Vermont's legislatively mandated payment for ecosystem services working group, which was a real diverse array of agency folks and a few farmers. It probably should have been the other way around. A lot more farmers and a few agency folks, but it was a policy-based discussion about shifting this paradigm to looking at soil health as a public good and looking at farmers as probably presently the most qualified individuals to steward landscapes in such a way that we would provide that multitude of or a multitude of ecosystem services that come along with soil health. Carbon sequestration and water infiltration or something being two kind of buzzwords in Vermont. So I totally agree. Having the consumer, learn more about their farmers, get to know their farms, support entities like NOFA or the Real Organic Project or regenerative ag ride-on certifications, but it's so challenging. The greenwashing is really tough, so to kind of meet their legislators and get kind of involved in this discussion about how do we start looking at our farmers as land stewards, and how do we actually hire those people to not only produce food but provide this array of services that we all need, that's for the public good. Allowing farms to diversify, to generate revenue and income from the sale of vegetables and milk and meat, and in addition to soil organic matter and carbon sequestration and infiltration, where suddenly it becomes somebody's main product is soil health, and an ancillary product and benefit is food.
Does anybody have any last minute questions before we say goodnight? Or any of the panelists want to share anything else before signing off?
I just want to share the t-shirt story. I'm sure maybe some folks have seen it. Heather Darby has done some research and some examples, of going back to the how do you assess biology. And on our farm, I just wanted to share, we're definitely looking at macrobiology and microbiology. Macro being dung beetles and earthworms and big critters that are living there. And an easy way is how long does a cow pat stay in the pasture? And after it dries out within a day, you can flip it over and see the multitude of organisms that are living within it. And our goal is really, by the time the cows come back 30 some odd days, 40 days later, we don't want any of those pats to be there. And we know things are really healthy and when that's the case, and that's gotten way better. Interestingly, on a micro level, we're not soil testing for diversity per se, but we're looking for it in other avenues. So when we do our forage test, we can do a soil test and kind of ascertain nitrogen. We can do a manure test. When we do our forage tests, we get this crude protein back on the forage test. But crude protein is nothing more than soluble nitrogen times 3.26. It's essentially meaningless. And if that crude protein isn't linked with a certain amino acids and enzymes to be a true protein, it's considered a non-protein nitrogen, which when a cow consumes non-protein nitrogen, that gets converted to urea or to ammonium, which is toxic and has to get converted to urea and comes out either the back end or in the milk. And in the milk, we get a test every day when they come take a milk test. We're testing our milk urea nitrogen levels, and we know we're a certain level where we want those to be. And based on different forages, you'll see those kind of climb, or based on pastures, you might see those climb or decrease a little bit. Well, those proteins are formed by plants that have a balanced chemistry. A plant, for example, like boron is the key that opens the door for calcium to enter the plant, and magnesium is the dump truck that brings the calcium there. And you have to have this balance between them all. Well, our boron samples could be relatively low, and we've never supplemented, we've never applied it, but we've invested heavily in our microbiology feeding those microbes within the soil. And over time of doing that, you'll start to see those milk urea nitrogen levels decrease. Higher is not good. We want them to kind of be around 11. And so if they're up to 18 or something, that's a sign that your proteins are completely imbalanced, which is usually a sign of like a microbial imbalance. And so we've seen those get rectified by like feeding that biology. And the t-shirt thing is just, you know, we tried it, we saw it somewhere, and we just took a couple of t-shirts, and we went around the farm and we dug holes and buried them. And then a year later, we went and dug them up and found what was left. And there was nothing left but the like nylon, the tag on the back, or a nylon band, you know, or something. And then, but all of the cotton, just cotton t-shirts, all the cotton had been completely consumed. And we went over and snuck into the neighbor's cornfield, and we dug and we put some t-shirts there. And a year later, you would dig up a dirty t-shirt. And so that was the cheap way to see how your biology is doing.
That is awesome. That's a great note to end our night on, and just the contrast of soil health. Thank you so much, Nick, Kate, and Tyler, for being a part of the evening of Ag Literacy Week, for sharing your stories and all of your hard, beautiful work that you're doing to steward the land. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Tomorrow night, we have one more Ag Literacy event, Gender Equality in Farming. Tune in if you would like. Sign up on the NOFA.org website. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful winter.